Hello and welcome to the Claude Cowork course. In this course, we're going to be taking a look at how we can create workflows and automations using Claude Cowork, specifically for a property investment business. Now, while we are focusing on a property investment business throughout this course, you're still going to be able to apply all the workflows and automations to your own business or to your own personal life. So all the lessons in this course are transferable to other domains. Now, the reason I've chosen to stick with a single topic throughout this course is because I myself have experience in property investment. So by extension, these are actually the AI workflows and automations that I use on a daily basis. But hopefully, the lessons in this course are generic enough that you can apply these exact same workflows and automations to your specific domain. Now, with that said, in this course, we're going to be taking a look at Claude Cowork to perform a whole bunch of tasks across a property-related business. So we're going to be taking a look at how we can organize files, create spreadsheets and reports based on our income from our rental properties. And we're going to have a renovation side to the business as well, where we're going to get Claude Cowork to go off and do a whole bunch of research for us to try and find deals for us for a potential renovation project. But more importantly, it's also going to analyze its own research to see if these properties are indeed a good deal for our investment business. So on a slightly more technical level, we're going to be taking a look at how we can create our own plugins within Claude Cowork, as well as our own skills and scheduled tasks. So with that said, I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture where we kick off the course. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the essential information you're going to need while working through the lectures in this course. Now, firstly, unfortunately, as of around the 1st of March 2026, there is an ongoing bug with Udemy where videos uploaded after the 1st of March are not processing in high definition. Unfortunately, they're only processing in 720p, which means even though I've uploaded all of these videos in 4K, unfortunately, the videos are not playing at the highest quality that they're able to play at. So if you're unable to select a higher quality of video above 720p, that's the reason. Unfortunately, instructors don't have any control over this. However, I do apologize for this in advance. And hopefully Udemy will fix this bug soon. Now, to be able to follow along in this course, you're going to need a paid plan with Claude. Unfortunately, Claude Cowork at the time of this recording is not free, so you're going to need at least the Pro plan. Additionally, this course is designed for beginners and non-technical people. So we're not going to get too into the weeds with technical terms and things like that. It's going to be more of a higher overview of how to set up these AI and workflows without really going too in depth of how they actually work. Now that brings me on to my next point, which is why even use Claude Cowork in the first place? Now, in my opinion, it's actually pretty simple. For example, I don't think you should be using Claude Cowork to accomplish tasks that you're not already doing, or to accomplish tasks that you don't really have any knowledge in. So for example, if you're not a day trader, I think it's a pretty bad idea to get Claude Cowork to try and perform some day trades for you, for example. However, it's highly likely that you're going to have a whole bunch of tasks that you're performing manually on a day-to-day basis, whether that's in your personal life or in business. And in my opinion, this is where Claude Cowork really shines. And in my opinion, it's what it should be used for. So the primary use case of Claude Cowork is to simply automate tasks that you would otherwise do manually. Of course, this will save you a bunch of time, but also Claude Cowork will often accomplish these tasks a lot quicker than if you worked on these tasks manually yourself. So as you work through the lectures in this course, I highly recommend that you try to identify a whole bunch of tasks that you're working on manually on a day-to-day basis that you could potentially use Claude Cowork to perform for you. So with that said, in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at setting up Claude on our local machine. In this lecture, we're going to set up Claude on our desktop. Now, the process is exactly the same for Mac and Windows. You need to head on over to claude.ai, and you're going to need to sign in to your Claude account. Now, like I mentioned right at the start of the course, you are going to need a paid plan with Claude. So this is not going to work on any free plans. You're going to need a paid plan. With that said, once you have logged into Claude, we can head on over to the download section in the bottom left of the screen here. So let's click on through to the download section, and specifically we want to download for our particular machine. So for example, Claude has already identified that I'm on Mac, so I will download the application for Mac OS. So it's under this Cowork section. Now, of course, if you're on Windows, you will see the download for Windows here. So go ahead and download the desktop installer for Claude for your specific machine. And I already have the installer open here, so I'm going to drag Claude into my applications folder to install Claude. Then let's go ahead and launch Claude. Let's hit get started here. And again, we're going to need to sign into our Claude account. So once you sign into your Claude account, you should have Claude all set up and running on your desktop. Now we can see we have 3 different functionalities and features as part of Claude. We have Claude Chat, we have Claude Cowork, and we have Claude Code. And of course, the focus in this course is going to be Claude Cowork. So let's click on through to Claude Cowork. And it's within here that we're going to get Claude to interact with files on our local machine and go off and do a whole bunch of long-running research and tasks for us. So on the surface, while Claude Cowork looks very similar to Claude Chat, with Claude Cowork, it can actually access different files and folders on our local machine, and it can go off and do a whole bunch of long-running tasks and perform tasks at set intervals. So for example, if we need to perform a particular task at 9 a.m. every day. So it's exactly what we're going to work through throughout this course. Now, before we kick off the course, let's divert our attention down to this model picker here. So while on the surface it may seem that Claude Cowork is generating outputs for us, under the hood, it's actually the model that generates these outputs. So we can see we have a choice of 3 different models here. Now, I highly recommend you select Sonnet 4.6 because Opus 4.6, while it is a lot better than Sonnet 4.6, Opus 4.6 actually eats into our monthly quota a lot quicker than Sonnet 4.6. Now, similarly, Haiku 4.5 uses a lot less of our quota compared to Sonnet 4.6. However, the results aren't as good. So hopefully you can see the pattern here. If we use fast and quick models, they use less of our monthly quota, but they're not quite as accurate in their responses. So in my opinion, the best balance is using Sonnet 4.6, and we can also enable extended thinking. Now, of course, if you enable extended thinking, again, this is going to eat up into our monthly quota. So if you want to disable extended thinking, you won't use as much of your monthly quota, but again, I prefer to enable extended thinking because the results that we get back from Claude Cowork are of a higher quality and are more accurate. Now, if that doesn't really make too much sense, don't worry, because I am going to give you examples throughout the course on issues I've faced, for example, when using Haiku 4.5, which those issues don't actually exist when working with 4.6. So don't worry, because I will point out weaknesses by using a quote-unquote lesser model while going through this course. Now, one other thing to note is we have this sidebar here. So if we open up this sidebar, we can see we have a few different options here. We can create a new task, which we're already in here. So we're in the task creator view here. We can also search for a particular previous conversation. Then we have scheduled tasks, which we can fire off at predetermined times, for example, 9 a.m. every morning. Then we have ideas, which essentially just contains a whole bunch of ideas to get started with Claude Cowork. Then we also have customize, where we can add our own skills, connectors, and plugins. And then, of course, we have our recent sessions. So before we get too far down the rabbit hole, in the next lecture, we're actually going to take a look at what skills, connectors, and plugins are. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the 4 main features of Claude Cowork, and specifically the most common ways that we're going to interact with Claude Cowork. So the 4 main features and the 4 main ways we interact with Claude Cowork are via commands, skills, plugins, and scheduled tasks. So first of all, let's take a look at what commands are. So commands are incredibly simple, and all they are saved common prompts. So if we find ourselves constantly typing the exact same thing or very similar things into Claude Cowork within the chat window, instead of having to type that out all the time, we could store this as a common prompt, i.e. a command. So if we head on over to Claude Cowork real quick, let's say, for example, as part of our property investment business, for our rental properties, at the end of every year, we're going to need to figure out our income and expenses for that particular property, as well as the profit and loss for that property. And ideally, as part of our tax returns, we would usually have some sort of categories for the expenses. So ideally, we would have all of this plot to a nice spreadsheet. However, if we find ourselves typing this exact same prompt every single time we want to do our tax returns, or every single time we want to generate a spreadsheet from our invoices and statements, instead of typing this entire thing out, instead what we could do is store this entire prompt as a command. So instead of typing all of this out, we could simply then run our custom command by prefixing with /. Then we would run the command by its name, so it could be called something like generate report. Now, of course, because we're right at the start of the course, I haven't created this custom command yet, so it's not showing up in the list of available commands, but this would be the way that we run our custom command, simply prefixing it by /. Now, in this course, we are actually going to create this generate report command. However, if we quickly revert back to our full text here and our full prompt, let's say, for example, that the format of this spreadsheet, where we have specific columns that we want and specific rules within that spreadsheet, let's say that that particular spreadsheet is actually going to be useful not just for our yearly report, but let's say we want to generate a statement for our property business for the past 6 months. Well, we could still use this spreadsheet, but it will not be a yearly profit and loss chart. Instead, we would use that same spreadsheet template, but just populating it with different data. So our spreadsheet template then, and the instructions on actually how to create our spreadsheet, could be modularized into something called a skill. So this is where skills come in. So if we head on over to our diagram here, all skills are instructions on how to accomplish a particular task. Now, skills may also contain things like Python scripts, and if you're not sure what Python is, it's a programming language. So these Python scripts then can be executed by Claude to generate some sort of output for us. In this case, it will be an Excel spreadsheet. So we could then have a custom skill specifically to generate an Excel spreadsheet in a particular way. And the really cool thing is we can combine both commands and skills. So our commands can actually reference one or many skills. So again, instead of having to type out exactly how to format our Excel spreadsheet, we could modularize that into a skill, and all of this selected text here, this entire definition for our spreadsheet, could be moved out into a separate skill. So this skill then would be reusable anytime we want to generate an Excel spreadsheet with that specific format and with these specific rules. Now, all plugins are, in the context of Claude Cowork, are essentially a collection of commands and skills. So what we're going to do in this course is we're going to bundle up all the commands and skills that we create specific for property investment, and we're going to bundle all of these up into a highly effective property investment plugin, which can then be installed by other users into their own Claude Cowork, and then those other users would then have access to all of the commands and skills for our particular property investment workflows. Now, the final way we interact with Claude Cowork is via scheduled tasks. Now, essentially, scheduled tasks are pretty much exactly the same as commands. However, they run at predetermined intervals. So, for example, in this particular course, we're going to create and run a scheduled task, which will be responsible for searching a property website to identify potential deals for a property refurbishment project. Now, the really cool thing with scheduled tasks is they can also reference skills. And in our use case as well, once we get a short list of potential candidates for suitable investment properties, we're then going to get Claude Cowork to automatically email us that report every single day. Now, the way Claude Cowork is going to email us that report is via a connector. So connectors within Claude Cowork are essentially just a collection of external tools to connect to third-party services like Gmail. And connectors are essentially MCP servers, and all MCP stands for is Model Context Protocol. And all you really need to know about Model Context Protocol is it's just a standard for these AI tools to connect to third-party services. That's all it is. It sounds very fancy and it sounds very technical. And of course it is technical. However, all it is just a standardized way for these AI tools to talk to third-party platforms. So with that said, now that we have a bit of context on the ways we can interact with Claude Cowork, it's going to be a lot clearer for you when we do get round to implementing these workflows and features within the course. Now, quickly before we finish up this lecture, you may be wondering at this point, well, what's the point of using Cowork compared to the normal Claude chat? And there's actually two reasons for this. The first reason is Claude Cowork has access to specific folders on our local machine, assuming we give permission to Claude Cowork for that access. And Claude Cowork can actually modify files and create files and also delete files on our local machine. So you can probably already imagine this is incredibly useful for things like organizing our files for a particular business. So for example, in our property business, it's going to be incredibly useful to organize our invoices and our statements. Additionally, Claude Cowork is designed for long-running tasks. So for example, for our scheduled task, which is also another feature which is not available in normal chat mode, for our scheduled tasks, this is going to be a long-running task. It's going to go off and do a whole bunch of research, and it's going to click on through to multiple property listings and then analyze the photos of those listings to see if it's actually a good candidate for a property renovation project. So doing all of this research is not going to be a quick task. So this is where Claude Cowork is incredibly useful. It's designed specifically for long-running tasks. So with that said, in the next lecture, we're going to delve into using Claude Cowork to arrange our invoices and statements for our property business, and then map all of that data to an Excel spreadsheet. Hey guys, before we move on to the next video, I want to quickly point out that throughout this course, you'll probably see a review prompt similar to what you're seeing now, where Udemy will ask you to leave a rating and/or review of the course so far. Now, this is optional. However, I'd really appreciate it if you did leave a rating and/or a review when these prompts do show up, because it lets other students know whether this course is for them or not. Additionally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a rating and/or review. So thank you in advance if you do leave a rating and a review of the course, and I will see you in the next video where we'll continue with the course. In this lecture, we're going to get Claude Cowork to organize our invoices and statements for a particular rental property in our property business. We're going to get Claude Cowork to rename all of those files so we have a bit more organization and we can easily identify the dates of those invoices and statements. And we're then going to get Claude Cowork to generate an Excel spreadsheet for us, displaying the income and expenses for the entire year. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is, first of all, have some invoices to work with. So I've already included as part of the resources section to this lecture, a whole bunch of example invoices we can use. So if I just open up one of the examples here real quick, all these file names have slightly different names. So ideally we'll have some sort of standardization between our file names. And for example, with a statement from in this lecture, we're going to get Claude Cowork to organize our invoices and statements for a particular rental property in our property business. we're going to get Claude Cowork to rename all of those files so we have a bit more organization and we can easily identify the dates of those invoices and statements. And we're then going to get Claude Cowork to generate an Excel spreadsheet for us, displaying the income and expenses for the entire year. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is, first of all, have some invoices to work with. So I've already included as part of the resources section to this lecture, a whole bunch of example invoices we can use. So if I just open up one of the examples here real quick, all these file names have slightly different names. So ideally we'll have some sort of standardization between our file names. And for example, with a statement from our letting agent, and in this case, our letting agent is Pete's Property Management, for the property 123A Cricket Road, each statement then from our letting agent will of course have the date, but we will have some rental income and we will have a management fee. Now, to make things interesting, halfway through this particular financial year, so we're going to assume this particular financial year starts on the 1st of January 2016 and ends on the 31st of December 2016. To make things interesting and more realistic, I've actually included halfway through this financial year, I've increased the management fee to 12%, and then a couple of months later, we increased the rental amount as well. So we should have some nice varying data to work with. Additionally, we also have maintenance costs for this particular property. So we should also have the yearly gas and electrical inspection reports, which of course we have to pay someone to do this. And we also have a repair. So we can see here in this particular invoice, there was a hole in the roof which was repaired, but then of course, this leak caused some damage, which means the damage also needed to be rectified. And of course, we can see the total amount. So I'm trying to keep things as real world as possible. Of course, all of these are just example invoices and example statements. These don't actually belong to any particular property business, but at least we have some really good high quality data to work with. So with that said, let's head on over to Claude Cowork then. And the first thing we want to do is make sure that we arrange our files so they're easily identifiable by the date that they were issued. So for this, I want to prefix each file name with the year, followed by the month, followed by the day of the month. So for example, it's going to be in this format, YYYY-MM-DD. So this should then translate to, let's say it's the 1st of December 2016. This should be then 2016 1201. So we'll prefix all of our file names with this pattern, followed by the original file name. So we'll have the original file name as well, and then of course the original file extension, which is a PDF file. So of course to do all of this manually would be a massive pain, but we can easily get Claude Cowork to do this type of work for us. Now, to be able to get Claude Cowork to do this type of work for us, we're going to need to provide Claude Cowork with access to our machine. Now, don't worry, because we're not going to give Claude Cowork access to our entire machine. We're just going to give it access to a certain directory, and then within that directory, a bunch of subdirectories or subfolders. So we're going to keep it very, very safe. We're not going to give entire access to our entire machine. So to do that then, we want to select this option here to work in a folder. And I'm going to create a new folder for Claude Cowork to work within. So we know then that Claude Cowork only has access to that specific folder, no other folders on our machine. So to do this then, I'm going to create a new folder. It doesn't matter where you create this new folder, but I'm going to create it in my home directory here. So I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it Claude Cowork Course. So let's create this new folder then. Then we want to hit open here and we can see this confirmation. We're being prompted here to confirm if we want Claude to change files in this particular directory. So this includes all files and subfolders. And we can see here, Claude will be able to read, edit, and permanently delete and may share file contents with third-party tools it connects to. So be careful about exposing sensitive information. So I'm actually going to opt here to always allow Claude Cowork access and permissions to do whatever it needs to within this particular directory, because it doesn't have access to any other directory on my local machine. So I'm actually going to opt then to always allow permission for this particular directory. Then at the moment, this particular directory is actually empty. So ideally, we will have all of our invoices located in this directory. So go ahead and download all of the PDFs of the example invoices and example statements from the resources section to this lecture. Then we want to go ahead and copy them all into the new folder we created. So it's the Claude Cowork course folder. So I'm going to paste all of those files into that folder. Then we want to get Claude Cowork to actually perform some operation on these files. So remember what we said? We said we wanted to, first of all, rename all of these file names. So they begin with a standardized pattern, which will be the date that the invoice or statement was issued. Then, of course, we want Claude Cowork to create that Excel spreadsheet for us for our income and expenses. So let's go ahead and start typing this out then. We're going to say, rename all the invoices and statements so they begin with, then let's put some backticks here. Then we're going to put some square brackets as a placeholder, and we're going to say YYYY-MM-DD. Then we're going to say dash. Then again, we're going to open up some square brackets. Then we're going to say original-file name. Then we're going to go dot. And again, we'll open up some square brackets, and we're going to say original-extension. Then we're going to say based on the date that the invoice or statement was issued. Then we're going to say, then create an Excel spreadsheet that lists the entire income and expenses and clearly displays the profit and loss. Now, I've intentionally kept this part of the prompt pretty vague because we're going to be working upon this prompt. Now, quickly before we hit enter here to submit this prompt, I want to point out that it's actually very rare that the first time we type out a prompt, it's perfect and Claude Cowork gets things right every single time. It's very rarely the case. What's more commonly the case is we realize we haven't given Claude Cowork enough information to perform the task to the standard or the expectation that we had. So based on this last portion of the prompt here, I can't expect Claude Cowork to generate a pie chart, for example, or to generate the spreadsheet with specific column names or column headers. So we are going to be working upon these prompts and tweaking our prompts. And I will say that that is one of the number one things where most people trip up is they simply don't give enough information to these AI tools like Claude Cowork. And so they get disheartened because they think AI is not working for them. Well, it's simply the case that we need to provide as much specific information as possible when trying to get these AI tools to perform tasks for us. So with that said, let's go ahead and hit enter on this prompt. And we can see Claude Cowork has started to work on our task. So we can see the progress of Claude Cowork at the top here. So it's first of all going to read all the PDF files to extract the dates and financial data. It's then going to rename all the files with the prefix we've specified. Then it's going to read the spreadsheet skill to understand how to actually create a spreadsheet. So this is a built-in skill to Claude Cowork. We don't need to install that skill ourselves. So once it's read that skill, it's going to know how to actually create an Excel spreadsheet. And then, of course, it will go ahead and create it. Then it's going to verify all the tasks it's performed and make sure that everything was done correctly. So we can see already Claude Cowork has apparently already renamed our files. So let's confirm this then. If we open up our Claude Cowork course, we can see this is indeed correct. We can see all of our files now have been renamed to the pattern and the rules that we gave Claude Cowork. However, now Claude Cowork is going off and creating a spreadsheet for us for all of those invoices and statements. Now, as a quick side note here, we can also see in the bottom right-hand side the context for this particular conversation or for this particular task. And we can see a list of skills that were used to accomplish this task. So we can see the XLSX skill was used to create our spreadsheet. And we can see that Claude Cowork has automatically opened this spreadsheet for us. So we can see an entire list here of income and expenses for 123A Cricket Road. And we can see we have the total income and the total expenses. So this is exactly what we asked Claude Cowork to do. Now it also looks like Claude Cowork has created a profit and loss summary. So we can see here the summary of profit and loss. And of course, in this case, we have a profit for the year. So while this is all well and good, I personally didn't want this profit and loss summary. Additionally, for the transactions, ideally, I wanted these expenses to be arranged into categories, so then I can easily create a pie chart of expenses. And of course, I did indeed want that pie chart. Additionally, if we're running a property investment business, we would likely have more than one rental property. So, for example, adding all of the invoices and statements to this Claude Cowork course directory is probably not such a good idea. Ideally, we will have some sort of hierarchy and directory structure, and ideally, we will have some sort of rules for working in different directories within the Claude Cowork course directory. So, for example, it might not just be property investment that we want Claude Cowork to create workflows and automations for. It may be other parts of our lives or businesses that we want Claude Cowork to work on. So, for example, as well as the rental side of the property business, we also have the renovation and refurbishment side of the property business, where we try to find potential properties that would be good to purchase as a renovation project. So, of course, the way Claude Cowork behaves in those different directories or in those different parts of our business will, of course, be different. So in the next lecture, we're actually going to create our property investment plugin, and we're going to start encapsulating a whole bunch of workflows and automations into skills and commands. So it's going to be a whole lot easier for Claude Code to produce higher quality results when working in these different parts of our business. In this lecture, we're going to create our very first Claude Cowork plugin. So it's going to be our property investor plugin, and we're going to start adding some custom commands and skills to that property investor plugin specific for our workflows to run our property investor business. Now, in this example, we really have two sides to the business. We have the renovation and refurbishment side and potential purchasing investment properties, and we have properties that we already own, which we're renting out. So we have the rental side of the business. So ideally, in our main Claude Cowork course directory, we would have, first of all, a property directory or a property folder. And within that property folder, we would have investments and rentals. Then, for example, within the rentals folder, we would have separate folders for each of those properties, ideally named with the first line of the property address. So these are just some rules that we're going to put in place to make working with Claude Cowork so much easier. Now, of course, in our day-to-day lives, we might not necessarily be using Claude Cowork for our property business. We could also be using it for one-off tasks in our personal lives or perhaps some other work we're involved in. So that's the reason we're creating a top-level property folder within the Claude Cowork course folder. Now, I want to make it clear as well that this is just my preference when working with Claude Cowork. I prefer just to allow Claude Cowork access to a single folder. So this is the main brain, if you like, of Claude Cowork, even though we are certainly able to give Claude Cowork access to other folders on our machine. However, I much prefer the security in knowing that Claude Cowork only has access and permissions to perform file operations within a single directory or a single folder. So this is the reason I'm organizing my directory or folder structure in this way. It's just my personal preference. So with that said, let's first of all create our property investor plugin, and we're going to create a setup command, which will set up the folder structure for a new rental property. So to do this, let's head on over back to Claude Cowork, and we want to create a new task here. Then we don't actually need to work from a folder here, but we want Claude Cowork to create this new property investment plugin for us. So we're going to say here, create a new property investment plugin with a, and then let's put backticks here, and then within these backticks, let's put / setup command that first of all asks the user for the first line of the rental property, their trying to set up. Then, once this is provided, create a new folder in the property/rentals folder, where the name of this new folder is the name of the rental property. Within this new folder, create two new folders called, and then we'll have files and reports. So we're going to make sure that all the invoices and statements belonging to a particular property will be stored in the files folder, and any reports that we generate off the back of these files in the form of spreadsheets will be stored in the reports folder. So let's go ahead and hit enter on this prompt. And we can see as part of the context here, the Create Cowork plugin skill, which comes built in with Claude Cowork, will be used by Claude Cowork to create our new property investment plugin. So we can see here the requirements are clear. So let me read the component schemas and then jump straight to implementation. So Claude Cowork has already launched the Create Cowork plugin skill. We can see the progress here and the outline of the steps Claude Cowork is going to take to create our new plugin. So with that said, it shouldn't actually take long for Claude Cowork to finish creating our plugin, but we can see here that as part of our new plugin, Claude Cowork has added the setup command as requested. So we can see here, for example, if our property is 12 High Street, within the property and rentals folder, we'll have a 12 High Street folder, and within that folder, we will have files and reports. So this is exactly the folder structure we want for our rental property business. So with that said, the only thing we need to do now is hit Save Plugin. So let's hit Save Plugin here, and we should be able to see if we head on over to Customize, we now have this new property investment plugin, and we can see by default it's been enabled, and we have a /setup command or a /setup skill. So let's go ahead and set this all up then. Let's head on over to create a new task. Then let's hit / in the chat area here, and let's start typing setup, and there we go. We can see we have a /setup command, which will go ahead and create our new folder structure for a new property. So one of two things are going to happen here. We could either provide an address to the /setup command, so then Claude Cowork is going to go off and create all those folders for us, or we could simply hit /setup here, and Claude Cowork should then request the address from us before then implementing those folder structures. Now, before we hit enter on the /setup command, because Claude Cowork needs to create some folders on our local machine, we need to specify which folder Claude Cowork needs to work out of. So we're going to select our Claude Cowork course folder here. Then let's hit enter on this prompt. And we can see as well, the setup command is prefixed with our plugin name. So this means then if we have multiple plugins, it doesn't matter if we have a setup skill or a setup command within those different plugins, it's always going to be prefixed with the plugin name. So Claude Cowork then is going to know exactly which setup command or setup skill to use. Now, before we go any further, we can see here that the setup skill was used from our property investment plugin. So anytime Claude Cowork uses commands and skills to generate its output or to accomplish a task, we will always see those appear within this context section. However, we're being prompted here for the first line of the property address. So we're going to type in the something else section here, and we're going to type the name of our property, which is 123A Cricket Road. So let's hit enter on this. And Claude Cowork has informed us that these new folders have been created. So let's go ahead and open up our Claude Cowork course folder, and we can see a new property folder has been added here with a new rentals folder. Within this, we have the first line of the address for this particular property. Then we have files and we have reports. Now, of course, we don't have any files or reports just yet. This was just to set up a new property on our local machine. So with that said, in the next lecture, we're going to add our invoices and statements for 123A Cricket Road into the files folder. Then we're going to generate a standard report in the form of an Excel spreadsheet with specific column headings, and we're going to generate a pie chart of the expenses breakdown for that particular property for that financial year. And more importantly as well, we're going to look at how we can influence the output of Claude Cowork by using something called instructions. So you may have already seen here, we also have the ability to add instructions in the form of a claude.md file. So in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at all of these different features. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at how we can influence the output and behavior of Claude Cowork by taking a look at the claude.md instructions file. However, quickly before we do this, I want to divert your attention first of all to our existing setup skill in our property investment plugin. So if we take a look at the definition of this skill, we can see we have some information here. If we scroll down to step 2, in my particular instance here, we can see that Claude Cowork decided to add a couple of rules in here, which, to be honest, I don't think are that necessary. So it's going to replace spaces with hyphens for the folder name. So we can see an example of this here. If our address line 1 was 12 High Street, it's going to put it all in lowercase and add dashes instead of spaces. Now, I'm not actually bothered about this rule. However, if we thought that these rules were unnecessary, we could easily come in here and modify this definition. So there's a couple of different ways we could do this. The most obvious way is if we hit edit at the top here, and if you have any compatible applications to edit markdown files, they will appear in this list here. However, we could just as easily click on through to show in folder here, and we could right click on our file, and on Mac, I'm going to edit this with text edit. However, you could easily edit this on Windows with Notepad. Now, there are a whole bunch of different apps that you can edit this file with, and all it is just a text file with a .md extension, so it's a markdown file. Now, if you're not sure what a markdown file is, I'll leave a link in the resources section to this lecture explaining exactly what markdown is, but it's essentially just a text file with some formatting options. And specifically, we can see here, for example, step 1 and step 2 in our definition file. This is our markdown file here. They both have slightly larger font sizes compared to the rest of the text. Additionally, we have these bullet points. So these are all formatted via markdown. So if we click on through to edit here and show in folder again, all we need to do is open up our setup.md file. So I'm going to open this up in text edit. Now, just as a quick side note here, generally, I wouldn't open this up in the text edit application. I would either open it up in an app called Obsidian, or I would open it up in VS Code because my background is in software development. So I would open this up in VS Code rather than a normal text editor. However, I'm going to assume a lot of people taking this course won't necessarily have that much technical knowledge, so opening up in a text editor is absolutely fine. Now, with that said, if we divert our attention here to step 2, for example, we can see step 2 is prefixed here with the double hashtag. Now, this is some markdown formatting here to display this step 2 as a heading, which is just a slightly larger font size compared to the rest of the text. Now, again, as well, we can see, if we scroll down here, we can see we have bullet points in step 2, and these are represented in markdown via these dashes. So anytime we add these dashes in markdown, they will render as a bullet point. So essentially all markdown is just a set of formatting rules that we can apply to a text document. However, with that said, if we were unhappy with any of this definition for this particular setup skill, we could go ahead and modify these manually. So if we wanted to remove these 2 rules here, where we replace the spaces with hyphens and we convert to lowercase, let's save this file now then. Then let's click on through to our property investment plugin and click on through again to the /setup skill. If we scroll down now, we can see that those 2 rules have now been removed from step 2. So we could easily edit this skill manually, or we could edit it via Claude Cowork if we wanted to as well. So we don't necessarily have to edit it manually. Now, I will say that it's a lot easier editing this file manually because as well, by editing with Claude Cowork or even Claude Chat, we're actually eating into our monthly threshold. So if there's some obvious editing you need to do in this particular definition, it's actually really easy to do manually rather than asking Claude to do it for us. Now, with that said, the way we add instructions to Claude is pretty much exactly the same as our definition for each of our skills. We add these instructions via a markdown file called claude.md. So let's go ahead and add this file then. All we need to do within our File Explorer, we need to navigate to our Claude Cowork course directory, and it's within here that I want to add the claude.md file. So anytime we're orchestrating Claude to perform some tasks for us with the Claude Cowork course folder selected, then this claude.md file is automatically going to be attached as additional instructions for Claude Cowork to follow. So let's first of all create our claude.md file in our Claude Cowork course directory. So to do this, I'm simply going to open up the setup skill again in the folder where it's located. I'm just going to copy this setup.md file, and I'm going to paste it into the Claude Cowork course directory. Then I'm going to rename this setup.md file to Claude in capital letters .md. So now Claude is going to recognize anytime it's working within the Claude Cowork course directory, it's going to know that it needs to pull in all the instructions within this file to every single one of our chats, and when it's trying to perform as well, any tasks that we ask it to perform. So of course we need to edit this claude.md file then. So I'm going to open this up again with Text Edit app, and let's zoom in a bit here, and I'm simply going to remove all this text. And remember, we might not necessarily be using Claude Cowork just for our property business. For example, we could just be using Claude Cowork for one-off tasks in our personal life or our business life. And again, not necessarily related to property. However, if these tasks are related to our property business, then we want to make sure that Claude Cowork knows exactly where to find any additional information it needs to perform the task it's trying to perform. So we're going to say in here, we're going to add some rules in, and we're going to say something like, if the user is requesting to perform a task related to property rentals, then you can find all the relevant information in the /property/rentals/ then we'll put a placeholder here in square brackets, and we're going to say property-name. Then we're also going to add a pretty similar rule, and we're going to say if the user is requesting to perform a task related to property renovation or refurbishing, then you can find all the relevant information in the /property/reno folder. So let's save this claude.md file now then. And anytime we work within the Claude Cowork course directory, this file is going to be attached as context to every single one of the tasks that we ask Claude Cowork to accomplish. And so then by extension, when we come round to creating our spreadsheet, or more specifically getting Claude Cowork to create our spreadsheet with our income and expenses, we're not going to need to specify to Claude Cowork where exactly we want that particular spreadsheet to be saved to, and we're not going to need to specify to Claude Cowork where to pull the data from, because it's going to know that if it's based on our rental properties, it's going to know exactly where to look for that information on our file system. So with that said, before we actually create our spreadsheet then, we're going to need to create a skill so Claude Cowork knows exactly how to create that spreadsheet for us. So in the next lecture, we'll create our financial report spreadsheet skill. In this lecture, we're going to create our new skill for our financial report spreadsheet. So let's head on over then to create a new task within Claude Cowork. And we're going to say, create a new skill for the property investment plugin that is responsible for creating an Excel spreadsheet with 2 sheets. And we're going to say the first sheet will be the report, and the second sheet will be the chart. Then we're going to say the report needs to list all of the income and expenses ordered by oldest to latest with the following column headings. Then we're going to specify our column headings. So we will have date, we will have description, we will have as well type, which can only ever be income or expense. Then we will have the category, which can only ever be for income. We can only ever have rent or refund for our income. And for expense, it can only ever be agent fee, mortgage, maintenance, and licensing. So these are just example categories for income or expenses. Again, feel free to add your own categories in here. However, I think for now that covers our categories. Then, of course, we also need an amount. Then we're going to say for the chart sheet, display a bar chart with months on the x-axis and the total amount on the y-axis. Then we're going to say each month should have 2 bars, one for income and one for expenses. Then finally, we're also going to add our pie chart of expenses. So we're going to say also include a pie chart displaying the breakdown of expenses. Now, before we hit enter on this prompt, you may have already noticed that I've said nothing about where this data is coming from to create this spreadsheet. And the reason for this is because I want to keep this skill generic in that I want to be able to generate a spreadsheet with this exact formatting from different data sources. So it doesn't matter then if the data source is coming from our local machine, if it's coming from files that we attach to Claude Cowork, or even if it's data that we simply paste into Claude Cowork. So that's why we're not specifying where the data is coming from. We're only specifying how this spreadsheet should be formatted. So with that said then, let's hit enter on this prompt. And we can actually see here that our instructions file has been included as context to this prompt. Not that we need these instructions because we're simply creating a skill right now. However, when we come to generating our reports, these instructions are going to be used by Claude Cowork to easily identify where it needs to work out of. However, let's head on back to our task at hand here, and we can see to create our skill, the spreadsheet skill and the skill creator skill was used by Claude Cowork. Now again, these two skills are already included as part of Claude Cowork. Additionally, we can see that Claude Cowork has already reviewed the property investment plugin, so it's got the correct location to create this new skill. And again, we can see the progress of Claude Cowork. We can see the exact steps that it's going to take. Now, while Claude Cowork is running through our skill creation here, if we were unhappy with any of these steps here, or if we thought Claude Cowork misinterpreted some of our prompt, and so the steps that were created off the back of that prompt were incorrect, then we could easily hit this little plus icon here to ask a question or recommend a change for each of these steps. So let's click on one of these plus icons here then, and we can see that that particular step has been added as context to our chat. And all we need to do is recommend a change if we thought a change was necessary for that particular step. However, I think the plan is pretty robust, so I don't need to change anything. But if you wanted to change anything within Claude Cowork's plan, this is the place that you would do it. Now, with that said, it looks like Claude Cowork has actually nearly finished creating our skill. So if we scroll down in the chat window here, we can see it's already created the skill and it's tested the skill with realistic sample data. And it looks like everything is correct. So once Claude Cowork has finished creating our new skill, we can see it's updated our property investment plugin. And if we open up the commands, we can see we have a new skill here called financial report. So before we run this financial report, we're going to need to save this plugin because changes have been made. So let's hit save plugin here. Let's head on over to customize again and click on through to our property investment plugin. And we can see our list of skills here. and we now have this new financial report skill. So let's go ahead and test this out then. First of all, I'm going to organize these files. So I'm going to do this manually because it's simply copying and pasting. So all of our statements that were renamed using our new naming convention, starting with the date. What we want to do is copy all of these statements. Let's click on through to our property folder and our rentals folder, then into 123A Cricket Road and into the files folder. Then let's simply paste all of those PDFs into the files directory. Then we want to create our new financial report. So let's create a new task then, and let's make sure we're in the Claude Cowork course directory. Then to create our financial report, we could either type / here and financial report, directly referencing the skill, or we could say something like, generate a financial report for all of the statements and invoices for 123A Cricket Road. So what's going to happen is Claude Cowork is going to identify that we've asked to generate a financial report, and it's going to know automatically to use the financial report skill. So we don't have to directly reference this financial report skill because Claude Code is going to infer that that's exactly what we want to do. So let's go ahead and test this out then. Let's hit enter on this prompt, and we should be able to see in the context, we can see the new financial report skill from our property investment plugin has been used. We can see Claude Cowork is checking our 123A Cricket Road folder, and it's checking the statements and invoices in the files folder. So it's going to first of all extract the transaction data from those PDFs, build the spreadsheet, then generate the report. So once Claude Cowork has finished them, we can see it's generated this financial report. So let's first of all check to see that this file exists. If we open up our File Explorer, let's click on through to the reports directory within 123A Cricket Road, and we can see we have this financial report spreadsheet. So we could either open this up directly from our local machine, or we could click on the appropriate app to open it up directly from within Claude Cowork, or we could simply preview it by clicking on the financial report here. However, I've noticed that the preview within Claude Cowork for things like spreadsheets is often a little bit glitchy and doesn't actually display correctly. So it does actually break a few things when it comes to previewing spreadsheets. Now, it could be the case as well that you don't actually have an appropriate app on your machine to open an XLSX spreadsheet. So the easiest way to open this file then would be to upload it to Google Drive and then preview this spreadsheet using Google Sheets. So it's exactly what I'm going to do then. I've already got open in my browser here my Google Drive. So I'm going to simply upload the financial report XLSX file into my Google Drive here. And once it's uploaded, we should be able to click on through then to this spreadsheet. And we can see this is exactly what we requested Claude Cowork to create for us. We have our list of transactions going from oldest to latest. And we have the transaction description, the type, the category, and the amount. Now, additionally, we also have our chart sheet where we have the breakdown of our income and expenses on a monthly basis. And we have our expense breakdown by category as well. So one really cool thing we can do now then is, if we were happy with this specific template and this specific spreadsheet that Claude Cowork has created for us, we could head on over back to Claude Cowork. Let's close this preview here, and we could say, update the financial report skill in the property investor plugin to include a copy of the financial report created above to use as a template for all spreadsheets created by this skill. So let's hit enter on this prompt, and we can see the skill creator skill has been used by Claude Cowork, which will be used to update our financial report skill. And as always, we can see a breakdown here of the steps that Claude Cowork is going to take to accomplish this task. So we can see Claude Cowork has already read our current financial report skill, and it's going to bundle our spreadsheet as a template and reference this template within the script that's responsible for creating the spreadsheet file. So we can see here that's exactly what Claude Cowork is going to do. It's going to update the skill now with these key changes, and more importantly, it's going to add an assets directory with our spreadsheet template to our financial report skill. So once Claude Cowork has finished updating our skill and our plugin, we should be able to see a preview of these updates. And if we click on through specifically to the assets directory here, we should be able to see a financial report template spreadsheet, which is going to be referenced then by this skill. So we know that we're going to receive this exact same spreadsheet in this exact same format every time we request Claude Cowork to generate a new report for us. So let's make sure then we save these changes. So all we need to do then is hit Save Plugin at the top here. And from here, we're actually going to make sure that these changes are appropriate and are actually working by running the financial report again. But we're going to run this on a new property. So in the next lecture, we're going to create a new property with its own set of invoices and statements. And we're going to make sure that our financial report skill is all working as expected. And we're also going to create another skill, which will be responsible for renaming our files with the prefix with the date that the invoice or statement was issued. So just like what we did right at the start of the course, where we renamed our files using a specific naming convention, we're actually going to turn that into a skill as well. So we'll take a look at finishing off everything to do with our property rental workflows in the next lecture, before then moving on to our property renovation workflows. In this lecture, we're going to create a skill that will rename our files just like what we did right at the start of the course. But of course, now we're going to turn that prompt into a skill. Then we're going to set up a new property using our setup skill. If we head on over to Customize and Property Investment, we have our setup skill that will set up a new rental property. And then, of course, we're then going to use the file renamer skill to organize all of our invoices and statements for that new property. And then we'll use the financial report skill to generate a new financial report on that new property. Now, one quick thing to note here is, so far, we've just added our skills to the property investment plugin, which is absolutely fine. And actually, I recommend doing this because so far, all of our skills are related to property investment. So then by extension, it makes perfect sense that we add these skills to a property investment plugin. However, if we had one-off skills or skills that we didn't necessarily want to add to the property investment plugin, all we need to do is simply ask Claude Cowork to create the skill. We don't need to specify that the skill needs to be created within the property investment plugin. So we can see here, we have some example skills. I already have 2 skills that I've created, which are not part of a plugin. So I have a blog post generator, just as an example, and I have a social post repurposer. But we also have built-in skills. So we have the skill creator skill, which has been used by Claude Cowork to actually create our skills. So it's a skill to create a skill. And out of the box, we have a bunch of other different skills. However, because our file renaming is specific to invoices and statements for our property investment business, we're going to add the file renamer skill to the property investment plugin. So let's go ahead then. And first of all, let's click on through to the very first task that we asked Claude Cowork to complete. And it was the renaming of our invoices based on the date that the invoice or statement was issued. So we're going to simply copy this part of our prompt here because we don't need this last part because that last part was generating the spreadsheet. However, we're just going to copy this then, and we're going to create a new task here. Then let's paste in our original prompt, and we're going to say here, create a skill for the property investment plugin that renames all the invoices and statements. So they begin with, and then of course we have our naming convention there. So it's based on the date that the invoice or statement was issued. However, I want to go a step further here, and I'm going to say if a file name already begins with the naming convention stated above, then ignore that file. Now, of course, I think it makes sense as well that Claude Cowork prompts us to ask us which property it needs to rename the files for. So we're going to say, if no property folder is directly specified by the user, prompt the user for the directory containing the files that need to be renamed. Then I want to make it absolutely clear to Claude Cowork that I don't want Claude Cowork to assume the directory that we want the files to be renamed in. So for example, if we're working out of the Claude Cowork course directory, I don't want Claude Cowork to assume that this is the directory containing the files that need to be renamed, if that makes sense. So I'm going to say here, do not assume a default folder. Always confirm which folder contains the files that need to be renamed. So we're doubling down on this particular rule for our skill. So with that said, I'm going to hit enter on this prompt then. And as always, our skill creator skill has been used by Claude Cowork to create our new file renaming skill. And it looks like the skill is going to be called invoice renamer. So this is absolutely perfect for our use case because that's exactly what the skill is going to do. It's not a generic file namer because if the file is not an invoice, then it won't have a date associated with it. So of course, then our naming convention won't make sense. So it is specific to invoices and statements. So we can see Claude Cowork has already checked out our existing property investment plugin. And now it's actually going to create the invoice renamer skill with the Python script that will be responsible for renaming our files. Then it looks like Claude Cowork has actually finished creating our new skill. So it's going to repackage our property investment plugin with that new skill. And once Claude Code has finished creating our new skill and repackaging our plugin, we should be able to see in the commands directory here, a new invoice renamer skill. And we can see as part of the skill definition, we have our naming convention followed by an example of renaming a particular file. So this is exactly what we need. And if we scroll down even further, we can see step 1 is actually confirming the folder that contains all the files that need to be renamed. So let's first of all save the new version of our property investment plugin, which contains our invoice renamer. Then we're first of all going to set up a new property. And don't worry because I've included all of the invoices and statements for that new property in the resources section to this lecture. So make sure you download all of those invoices and statements. And of course, I already have them downloaded to my machine here. So I'm just going to open up one of these statements. And the address for our new property is 1B Gym Terrace. So let's go ahead then and first of all, set up our new property. So this is a new task. So let's go ahead and create a new task then within Claude Cowork. Then we can see here we do actually have some suggestions as part of our property investment plugin and workflows here to set up a new rental property. So we could just as easily click on through to one of these helpful suggestions, or we could simply run the setup command. Or again, we don't necessarily need to type /setup here. We could say in plain English, set up a new rental property. So it's going to do exactly the same thing. And Claude Cowork is going to match our wording here with the skill definition, and it's going to know that it needs to use the setup skill. Now, if we clicked on the suggestion by Claude Cowork is going to pre-populate our text area with that command or with the skill. So let's click on setup rental property, and we can see the /setup command has been pre-populated in our text area. So then I'm actually going to provide Claude Cowork with the property address. So it's 1B Gym Terrace. So let's hit enter on this prompt. And we can see our property investment setup skill has been used by Claude Cowork. And apparently our folders have all been set up for this new rental property. So let's confirm this then. If we open up our Claude Cowork course directory, let's click on through to property and rentals. And we have here 1B Gym Terrace with our files and our reports. Now, the really cool thing with Claude Cowork is we could ask Claude Cowork to perform multiple tasks as part of the same prompt. So for example, let's copy and paste all of the statements for 1B Gym Terrace into the files directory here. So these are all of the statements for 1B Gym Terrace. So instead of asking Claude Cowork to rename our files and then waiting for the files to be renamed before then asking to generate a report, we could ask Claude Cowork to do both of those things in the same prompt. So let's go ahead and do this then. We can do this as part of our same task window here. So we don't need to create a new task for this. We could say invoice renamer, and we're going to provide the address for the property. So it's going to be 1B Gym Terrace. Then we could reference another command here for our financial report. Now, again, we don't necessarily need to reference these skills in our text area here. We could just as easily say, rename all the invoices for 1B Gym Terrace, then generate a new financial report for those invoices and statements. So let's hit enter on this prompt then. And we can see the invoice renamer skill is being used by Claude Cowork. So that's so far so good. And we can see all of the files that need to be renamed have been loaded into Claude Cowork. So we can see these files, these 12 files are going to be renamed using our naming convention. And so far, this looks like exactly what we want. So we have our original file names to be renamed to these file names here. And actually, it looks like Claude Cowork is asking if it should go ahead and rename these files. So let's say yes to continue with the task. Then let's open up our files directory for 1B Gym Terrace. And we can see all these files have now been renamed using our naming convention. So from here then, Claude Cowork should go off and generate a new report with those files. So we can see here, it's generating the report for 1B Gym Terrace. And we can also see as well in our context, as expected, the financial report skill is being used by Claude Cowork. And actually, it looks like the financial report has been created. So let's check this out then. If we open up our file explorer, let's click on through to reports for 1B Gym Terrace. We can see we have our financial report here. So I'm just going to rename this actually to financial report 1B Gym Terrace. And just like before, I'm going to upload this to Google Drive. So let's head on over to Google Drive then. Let's drag in this new spreadsheet to upload to Google Drive. Then let's open this up. And perfect. All this looks really good. We have exactly the same spreadsheet format as before, because remember, we provided Claude Cowork with a spreadsheet template to use. So if we click on through to chart as well, we can see we have our monthly income and expenses, and we have our expense breakdown by category in the form of a pie chart. So this spreadsheet is going to be exactly the same every single time because we gave Claude Cowork a template to work from. If we hadn't have given Claude Cowork a template to work from, then the spreadsheet that gets generated would probably be slightly different every single time. So with that said, that concludes our workflows for the rental side of the business, which means in the next lecture and the next section, we're going to be moving on to some more advanced workflows and automations by getting Claude Cowork to perform a whole bunch of research for us to hopefully identify potential renovation properties. So we'll take a look at more advanced features from Claude Cowork in the next lecture. In this lecture, we're going to start to take a look at some more advanced features within Claude Cowork. Specifically, we're going to take a look at scheduled tasks, and we're going to create our own scheduled task to try to find potential renovation properties that fit our criteria. Now, we're going to be using rightmove.co.uk as it's the biggest platform for buying, selling, and renting properties in the UK. And we're going to get Claude Cowork to go to the Rightmove website, and based on search criteria that we give Claude Cowork, Claude Cowork is then going to identify if a particular property needs a renovation. If it does, then it's going to shortlist that particular property. And in our shortlist, Claude Cowork is going to rank each property in that list out of 10 whether it's a good deal or not. Now, the really cool thing with this is we're then going to get Claude Cowork to email us a summary of this report, and we're going to get this report every single day. So previously, this would likely be a very time-consuming manual task for us to complete. However, Claude Cowork can go off in the background at a scheduled time every single day to perform all this research for us and to generate the report for us. Now, in this lecture specifically, we're going to need to do a little bit of setup before we start building out our scheduled task. Now, the very first thing we're going to need to install is the Claude Chrome extension. So this extension will allow Claude Cowork to interact with Google Chrome by itself. So it's going to interact with the Rightmove website by itself. So I will leave a link to the specific Claude extension that you're going to need to install for Google Chrome. So it's this particular extension here. However, once we have it installed, we're also going to need to connect our Gmail to Claude Cowork. So this is where connectors come into Claude Cowork. So if we head on over then back to Claude Cowork, let's click on through to customize, and let's click on through to connectors. And we specifically want to connect Gmail here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit connect here. Let's hit continue. Then we want to sign in to our Gmail account. So let's hit continue again. Then we should be prompted to give Claude Cowork permissions to interact with our Gmail account. Specifically, we want to give Claude Cowork permission to view our email messages and settings and to manage drafts and send emails. So we need to make sure that Claude Cowork has those permissions. So let's hit continue again then to provide that access. Then let's hit open Claude, and perfect. We can see we are now connected to Gmail, and these are all the tools that Claude Cowork is allowed to perform on our behalf. Now, from within Claude Cowork as well, we need to make sure that the Claude in Chrome connector is enabled. So this is based off the Claude extension that you should have already installed from the link provided in the resources section to this lecture. So with that said, that's everything we're going to need to install to perform our specific scheduled tasks for our property renovation business. However, I highly recommend, if we head on over to Google Chrome real quick, I highly recommend, because Claude Cowork is going to be interacting with Google Chrome, there's nothing stopping us installing Google Chrome extensions specific to websites that we want Claude Cowork to interact with. So just as an example here, I'm going to do a quick search here for properties in Rhondda Cynon Taf. Let's do a quick search here, and let's just search properties because the property list at the moment doesn't actually matter. Now we can see here this price change history. This isn't a feature of the Rightmove website. This is a Google Chrome extension providing this feature. Now, I highly recommend whenever you get Claude Cowork to interact with Google Chrome, just like what we're going to do in the next lecture, I highly recommend that you remove as much friction as possible and remove as many steps required for Claude Cowork to retrieve the information it needs to retrieve when interacting with Google Chrome. So we could do that by providing exact URLs and also installing Chrome extensions, such as the one I have installed here. So if I open up my extensions real quick, it's this property log extension. Now, if you also want to install this property log extension, I will also leave a link to this extension in the resources section to this lecture. Now, as far as doing research from Rightmove goes, it's generally the case that if a property has been advertised on Rightmove for quite a long time already, and the price has dropped significantly, then it usually indicates a motivated seller. So by extension, we could potentially get a good deal on that particular property. So with that said, in the next lecture, we're actually going to build out our scheduled task for Claude Cowork to do a bunch of research for us via Google Chrome on the Rightmove website to find our potential renovation property deals. Congratulations, you've reached the end of the course, and that's a huge achievement. Thank you for sticking with it, putting in the effort, and leveling up your skills. I hope this journey has empowered you with new knowledge and real-world confidence. But remember, learning doesn't stop here. Technology is always evolving, especially in the current climate where AI is improving day by day. So continuing to grow, continuing to stay focused, and continuing to stay connected is more important now more than ever. So I highly recommend from here, you connect with me on LinkedIn, where I'll be more than happy to endorse your skills related to this course. Now, I'll leave a link to my LinkedIn profile in the next lecture. And once you connect with me on LinkedIn and I accept your connection request, just drop me a DM informing me which course you've come from, and I'll be more than happy to endorse your skills related to this course. So once again, thank you very much for taking this course. Congratulations on completing the course, and I look forward to receiving your connection request